We will move to our next speaker. Our next speaker is Malori Meyer from Pros. Pros is well, I'll let her correct me on this if it's wrong, but Pros is a company that uses methods relating to statistics, operations research, data science, machine learning in the travel industry and other areas that could really benefit from these techniques. And her talk today is titled When and How Airline Bookings Will Return to Cruising Altitude. I'm sure that, as all of you probably know, you haven't been traveling quite as much as you may normally have in a 9-month period or whatever, and so this should be an interesting thing to look at. So Malori, please take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Roy. Definitely, my next slide is talking about Pros. So thanks for introducing the company. So Pros is a company on a high level that offers revenue management systems to our customers. And we started in the airline industry. So the airline industry is definitely a big focus of our business. We have an 80% market share in the airline industry itself with over 100 airline customers worldwide. And these customers span over 55 countries. So demand forecasting of airline bookings is a small portion of the revenue management systems that we offer our customers in the airline industry. And this actually put us in a unique position to help the airline industry in this unprecedented time of COVID-19. So Pros actually formed a company-wide COVID response team to help the airline customers. So this presentation will be the works of many and how we've tried to help our airline customers out. Here are just a few of our Pros customers that allow us to share their logos. You can see throughout here many of the airline industries that we work with. And a problem introduction. I'm sure many of you are well aware that COVID-19 has affected nearly every country in the world. And as Roy mentioned, the airline industry has been very hard hit. There are many reasons why the airline booking forecast is important to the airline industry because it impacts so many portions of their business. For example, flight scheduling, fleet planning, revenue management, and staffing, just to name a few. So Pros set out to investigate a few questions that would help this demand forecasting and help the airline industry as a whole. So the first question that we looked at was what signals can we watch for that indicate that bookings will return? Would it be something from the government about movement restrictions, or would it be more pandemic related in the actual infection rates? And when they do return, what characteristics of the bookings will we see when they do return? So will we see business or leisure return first, or what kind of trend will we see between domestic and international travel? So we asked our customers to participate in this study, and we received participants worldwide. This project actually set a precedence of sharing data in the airline industry for the benefit of everyone. So because of these participants, we're able to get a global view of bookings that allow us to build a more effective model by combining all the participants' carriers' information. We all know, as Roy mentioned, that the epidemic is affecting people's willingness to travel and the amount of airline bookings that we're seeing. When there's an increase in the case counts, we see some time lag, and then the bookings change will shift as well. Another important piece of this puzzle is the government response. So is the country's borders on lockdown, or is the country's stay-at-home measures getting more stringent? These type of things will influence the amount of bookings that we see. So the first step to our modeling process was to estimate the time lag of when we see a change in our epidemic information, when do we see that shift in our bookings happen? So we ran a cross-correlation function between a government response information about a country and the booking data from that country. The input of this model are many countries that behave differently and respond differently to the epidemic that's going on. Some countries are more stringent about their lockdowns while others are not. So this data is rather messy, as is with all real data. So the optimal point doesn't show itself in exactly an optimal time lag, but more as a range. So we noticed that this range is somewhere between 3 and 10 days. And what that means is that when there's a change in the epidemic information or a country's government response, we see that the booking shift happens somewhere between 3 and 10 days. So we use this information to lag all of our epidemic information and government response information by a week when we join it in our model for our bookings information. The next step was to estimate the impact. So we put all of this information into our model and we wanted to analyze results to answer some of those questions that I posed earlier. So let's dive into how our model is actually built by first learning about the data itself. So we use a multitude of third-party free public data sources, with the first being epidemic information from Johns Hopkins. And you may have seen this dashboard where they use the visual to show all of their epidemic information for country to country. And from this data source, we get information about new case counts per day and new death counts per day in each country. And then we're able to calculate the cumulative totals and also the mortality rate per country. We decided to do some feature engineering to normalize the case count so that large and small countries are equally weighted in the data set. And to do that, we used population data to create a metric of cases per 100,000 people. It's actually really increased our accuracy in the model and allowed us to drop some of these high cardinality variables that are in the data innately, such as origin country and destination countries of a flight. The next set of data that we wanted to look at was the government response, and we found this data from the University of Oxford. And this data set represents the stringency of a country's government lockdown. It comes in the form of many measures that are correlated with each other. There's school closure, gathering size restriction, internal movement restrictions. And each of these have its own range that indicate how stringent the lockdown measures for each of these categories are. So for gathering size, for example, it's 0 to 4, with 0 being no restrictions, while 4 means that only people of groups less than 10 can congregate together. We decided to use a weighted average of all of these metrics to represent a country's government stringency index. And then we did some feature engineering where we create an interaction term of the origin and destination country stringency. So when we multiply these two values together, we create a value that represents the stringency or government lockdown of a specified flight path. And our last grouping of data is booking related data. This comes from our participants in the study and our RM systems at PROS. So all of our participants allowed us to use their booking related data, and these are the bits of information that we take from those data. So fare class, so first class, business, economy, origin and destination region of those flights, and how many days prior that individuals buy their tickets before the departure date, and then information about the bookings. So we chose to pull in information about where the bookings were in 2019, as well as some lagged information about where the bookings were 1 week ago and 2 weeks ago. We input all of this information into our random forest model. We chose this type of model because there were complex interactions that were non-linear and complex for linear models to understand. So our linear models did not perform as well as the random forest could. And our random forest predicts bookings. And this bookings response variable is in the form of percentage bookings relative to 2019. So what that means is a positive value is that our predictions are higher than they were in 2019, and a negative value represents that they're still less than they were in 2019. To get estimates or predictions of where we think that bookings were going to be in the future, we needed to create scenarios to push through our model to get those forecasts in the future. So we needed estimates about the government stringency and the epidemic measures. Was the government going to get more strict about their lockdowns, or were they going to ease up? And the same goes for epidemic measures. Were the case counts going to increase or decrease? We knew that this was not our specialty to be able to predict these type of things to build our scenarios. So we relied on another third-party data set, IHME, the Institute of Health Metrics and Evaluation Forecasts. So we used values from here to get proxies of baselines of where we thought that the government stringency and the epidemic measures would be in the future. For the government stringency, we used a value from this data set about projected mobility. This actually came from cell phone data. So we use this as a proxy to figure out how stringent the lockdowns would be in countries. And then we pulled the forecasts from this data set about infection and death counts. So once we built our scenarios, we pushed those through our model to get our predictions. And now I'll show you some of those results and we can analyze those. So this first one is predicted recovery and current status based on fare class. So that is first class, business, and economy. Our current values as of October 2020 says that first class is the least impacted of the fare classes at 23% below 2019 values, and business and economy are much more impacted. Our predicted recovery in the next 3 to 6 months shows that fare class is first class fare class is much slower to recover, while business and economy are much steeper recovery rates. Business and economy behave pretty similarly. And now let's look at predicted recovery based on the weeks prior to departure. So in the airline industry, there are 2 dates that are very important. The first date being the departure date, or when you're leaving for your vacation or business trip, or whatever that flight is. And then also how far in advance you book that. So that is how many weeks prior to departure. There are many different buying patterns for these buckets of time. So this is a very common thing for predicting the demand forecasting, to bucket this time span into buyers that behave similarly. So we have 0 to 1 week before departure, 1 week to 2 week, and so on. And our biggest bucket is 6 months or more in advance. So anything above this line represents that bookings are greater than they were in 2019, and anything below this line represents that bookings are less than what they were in 2019. Here are the current values as of October 2020. Notice that we have a huge outlier in the 6 months to 1 year before departure date. There are very little impact right now at 9% below 2019 values. This could be for a multitude of reasons. I'm sure you're well aware of the offerings of free cancellation, or people capitalizing on the airline flight prices being low back in March, and maybe they planned a trip way out in the future thinking that everything would be gone. And here are our predicted recovery rates in the next 3 to 6 months. So we see a much steeper recovery in 0 to 1 week out. And I think that this could be correlated with the slide that we showed previous about the business fare class being a steep recovery rate. Business people generally book their ticket 0 to 2 weeks out because that's how far in advance they have to plan. So these could be our business people coming back. And an outlier over here is showing that bookings that are much further out in the 6 month to 1 year time span show actually an increase compared to what they were in 2019. And I think that this is a big shift in the buying behaviors. We didn't have time to show that today, but we do see a shift in buying behaviors of people buying much before their actual departure date, when generally those bookings would fall somewhere in these categories here. And now let's look at the predicted recovery in different regions based on flight type. So for domestic, the current value in North America is down by 66%. Flights within North America are down by 70% compared to 2019. And flights between regions, so from North America to a different region, are down by 49%. And here are the other regions in our study and their current values. And here are the predicted recovery rates in the next 3 to 6 months. So we notice that domestic has a much steeper predicted recovery rate than the within regions and between regions flights. And we also saw an outlier here with Europe domestic. So this is something that we may look into further about why there would be a actual worsening of the predicted recovery in the domestic flight. Maybe there's a predicted second wave over there, something that we could analyze and see what's going on over there. So for our next steps, we plan to use these predictions to help our customers in our revenue management system. So that's what we'd be working on now. And I wanted to provide these additional resources of blogs that give you more information about the project that we're working on, how we're helping our customers in the airline industry as a whole. And I hope that you enjoyed this talk. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mallory. We're running a little bit over at this moment, so I will ask you one quick question.
Sure.
Do you have any sense of if there will be so-called make-up travel once things have gotten better with the pandemic? People putting off travel that previously they had planned. Is that something that you're expecting from?
We haven't analyzed it in the data itself, but I can just tell you by a judgment, if there's free cancellation, why not, right? A lot of airlines are offering this free cancellation or move it to the next year, these type of incentives that will help people book and feel certain that they're not wasting their money. So yeah, I think definitely makeup travel might happen. Maybe there's a surge later when things have settled down. And anyone's question that we didn't have time to get through, I will get those on the chat in the recording.
All right. Thank you very much.